Welcome to part 2 of the 2019 Midsummer Garden Tour. Part 2, we're going to focus only on tomatoes. There's a lot of tomatoes in the garden and I really want to take a separate time to look at them. It is 94 degrees here in Minnesota for Zone 4B. It's really sticky outside. The humidity is at 62 degrees and the feels like temperature is at 114. So it's really hot, it's really humid. The bugs are out. So I think I just went up my nose. So let's get started. We're gonna start up here on the deck, on the patio tomatoes. They're not really patio tomatoes, but that's where I'm growing them. And we'll walk down to the garden. Up here on the deck, I have 3 tomato plants growing, actually sort of 4, that I'm growing for a very specific purpose. I'm doing a sort of a short series for those of us in the world who are tomato haters and would like to learn to like tomatoes. I love to grow tomatoes, but I don't like to eat them. So I'm trying a couple of different varieties to see if I can learn to like tomatoes. And so I kind of took a poll online and got some recommendations from people on what to try. So these I started way late in the season. Bought them from a nursery. Normally I start from seed. And let's just see how they go. So the first one I picked up was this Sun Sugar tomato. It's doing really well. You know, considering how late I got it, and it's got lots of flowers and some little tomatoes growing there. These are doing fine. These 2 varieties were recommended to me by friends on the Gardening Coast to Coast Facebook site. The first one on, let's look at this one here. This is the black creme tomato. Again, I started these really late, so they're still super tiny. They're getting some flowers on them, but the plants look mostly healthy. There's a little bit of discoloration on these leaves, so I did come out here with some neem oil and spray these down this morning, so hopefully that's not going to be a problem. I think they're going to be just fine. And then this one is the Cherokee Purple Heirloom tomato. Also small, but really the purpose of these is just to get 1 or 2 tomatoes off here at the very least, so that I can sample them and start kind of training my palate to really like tomatoes. These were recommended to me as good ones for that purpose. And then in here I had started some ground cherries from seed, again really late in the season, but they're growing, and if I know anything about ground cherries, I know that they're fast growers and they're prolific. So if I don't get anything off them this year, I'll be kind of surprised, but also kind of not. So I planted these 2 for my Tomater-Hater Rehabilitation training. So I'm going to see if maybe I'll let the ground cherries start to work, you know, train my palate to like tomatoes. They got a little bit of a tomato flavor. I had a few extra seed starts, so I just threw them in these cups in case they grew and somebody wanted them. So those are the ones on my deck, and they seem to be doing fine, and I should get some tomatoes off them pretty soon. Let's head down to the yard. So down here in the yard I have these 2 rows of experimental tomatoes that the reason I call them experimental is just because I didn't have any faith really that they would grow, because they were just seedlings that I had extra. I planted way too many tomatoes this year. I sold a bunch, I crammed a bunch in my garden, and I still had all these ones left over. And these are really the leftovers. So I quickly just dug out holes in the ground, threw the seedlings in there. The soil, really, I didn't do much to it, and in fact the soil was so unhealthy that there were just, I don't know if it was really unhealthy, but the fact that I didn't see any bugs or worms or any soil life in there whatsoever just made me kind of think that these are probably not a very healthy spot for tomatoes. But I've been tending to them. I've been giving them lots and lots of care, and they're doing much better. This first plant here was actually a purchase from the nursery because I gave away all my Super Sweet 100 plants except for one, and that one died. So I had to go buy one, and this one is coming back to life. I accidentally chopped off one of the main growing stems, which is fine. I meant to have two stems, but this is doing fine, and it's growing some tomatoes. The rest of these are just leftover Roma tomatoes and Viva Italia tomatoes. This one I'm allowing just to bush out fully. I've not pruned it at all. It had a lot of growth at the bottom of the stem. And I thought this would be a fun one just to kind of let grow wild and see what happens. There's a little guy next to it here on this pole. It's just tiny, but it's already grown a couple of tomatoes. I don't know if that makes a difference. So when you have a tiny plant like that and you grow tomatoes on it, are those tomatoes as good as a big, great big healthy plant? I don't know. Maybe you can tell me. And then another row over here. Again, these are Roma and Viva Italia. I don't know which is which. Some of them had labels, some of them didn't, but I'm just kind of letting them do their thing, and they're doing fine. This one's got a bunch of tomatoes on it. These two little guys are just sprigs. I think these were even second round. You know, I had some in here and pulled them out because they were doing yucky, and then I planted in here even more leftover seedlings. So we'll see how these do. They were in really rough shape because they were in basically solo cups for a long time. They were starting to get wilty and spotted, and I cut off all the dead, or you know, the yucky looking leaves, and I've given them a lot of care, and they're doing okay. They're not doing awesome considering the amount of care I've had to give them, but they're doing okay. So let's head over and look at the garden tomatoes. This is the main vegetable garden. It's got a lot of tomatoes in it, so I'm going to try to show you where they are. So this bed, I'm going to show you the base of the bed here. This bed is full of tomatoes. Every tomato that's in here is intended to be for sauce and salsa. Because I'm not a big tomato eater, that's what I've always grown tomatoes for. So I've only ever grown Roma. I'm trying a couple of different varieties this time though. So you can see this whole bed right here is full of tomatoes. And then over here you can see these tops. That's a half a bed. So where you see this trellis and these tops, that's the bed. And then the front part of that bed is full of tomatoes. And then over on this side, I have 2 rows of indeterminate tomatoes. One is a gladiator and the other side is super sauce. I haven't grown indeterminate tomatoes before because like I said, I've only really done Roma, so I can make salsa and sauces. So that's new for me, and the varieties that are up on the deck are new for me. Actually, all of these varieties besides the Roma are new for me. But let me show you this from back here quickly so you can see. You can see really clearly right here in this first section, right about to that first set of stakes there, is where I planted the Roma tomatoes. And then from here over, and in the back bed over here, those are all Viva Italia. And Viva Italia tomatoes are, if I remember the reviews correctly, they're essentially Roma tomatoes, but they're bred to be better producers and more disease resistant. But you can see really clearly that the Roma tomatoes are much smaller than these Viva Italia. I think that they're both determinate varieties, so I'm kind of surprised that the Viva Italia is growing so big. I can look at it again, but pretty sure they're all determinate, so I'm surprised they're so big. I do crowd in my tomatoes every year. So you'll see in this bed, and it's only, let's walk around to this side. It's only about you know, maybe 4.5 foot bed wide. And I've got tomatoes planted on either side, and then offset between them I have a row in the middle. So they're really crowded in here. You can see down in there, it's just a jungle of tomatoes in here. Really, they're about, you know, they're offset. They're probably still about, you know, 18 inches apart. But I think these, since they bush, should have probably been planted even further apart than that. But to me, I mean, I always overcrowd my garden, and to me what this really means is just that I've got some work to do, and I've got to keep a really close eye and make sure that this overcrowding doesn't cause any disease issues with these tomatoes. So let's start looking at these. These are, on this side, these are all Roma. And you can see that this Roma tomato plant, all of them, are just absolutely loaded with tomatoes. Look at that big cluster down in there. Let's take a walk around. I didn't have enough cages for everything, so in between some of the cages I left some of the tomatoes open, and I'm just staking them where they need it. That one was pretty uncrowded and was flopping over, and so I tied that one up, and then on the other side too, and this one I just put stakes in there to help support them. I'm not really pruning them in the sense that you might think of pruning tomatoes, but I do cut off a good, you know, 11-12 inches through the bottom, and I cut the leaves off. And suckers, if they're, you know, if they're that low and if they were hanging, I cut them off too in some cases. This one I did not, so you can see I trimmed off the leaf here and let this sucker grow. And you can see all the clusters of tomatoes that are coming down in here. So these are doing really, really well. I did see, maybe I can find, yep, even right here. So like I said, this Viva Italia, I have really high hopes for this plant, this variety, but I can already see that some of them have gotten some blossom and rot. So right here you can see this little guy. I'm just going to pluck that off. Let's see. Yeah, so can you see this? A lot of this cluster right here, trying to get it in the viewfinder here. A few of these on this cluster have got blossom and rot on them. I did not amend this bed with anything. I mean, there's compost in here, lots of compost in here. In fact, I think it's mostly compost. But I didn't put any additional lime or anything like that. The only fertilizer I've put in these beds is in the beginning I was putting down the Miracle-Gro from the hose. And then I came out here again last week and I put down some granular organic fertilizer as a top dressing. And that'll be a slow release fertilizer. So they're setting their fruits. They're doing really well. I do see some blossom and rot, but I'm not going to panic because it's not a lot. And it's pretty common for that to happen on these early, you know, the first tomatoes that come. And so many of these tomatoes are just perfectly healthy, and so I'm just super not worried about the blossom and rot. I am a little bit more surprised to see them on this Viva Italia plant because it's supposed to be more resistant. I guess maybe not to that. I'll have to look it up. So let's walk over to just this group of Romas. So these are doing really well. This cluster is looking healthy. The bottoms look just fine. They're doing really well. I'm not seeing any issues at all with spotting on the leaves. Everything just looks green and lush and beautiful. There's just, I just feel so lucky. Lots of times when it gets hot like this, you know, this may be our last tour that we're going to see these healthy tomato plants, because towards, you know, in the second half of the season, tomatoes tend to Sorry guys, I'm swatting at some mosquitoes here. Tomatoes tend to start getting a little bit sickly. So these are doing great. The ends of these tomatoes are looking nice and healthy. This little sack down here. Yeah, these tomatoes are looking really good. I'm excited. I'm happy about them. Again, these got some pruning. Really, it was just to remove... Oh, so a couple things. So I removed a lot of the lower leaves to keep the air flowing through here, but I removed a lot of just other leaves. So leaves that were really crowding in the plant, leaves that seem to not be drying well in the interior here. I really thinned this out a lot, but I didn't take off suckers. I only took off leaves, and that was sort of a trial thing for me to see if it helped. And of course I didn't do like a control experiment. I just did all the plants because it made sense to me to, you know, if these were overcrowded, to take off some leaves and let them breathe a little bit. This entire bed is Viva Italia, the front part of this bed here. This one I'm not sure why it's a little less full than the rest. Actually, maybe I do remember seeing some spots on that one and removing a bunch of leaves, but it seems to be doing really well now. The rest of these plants are looking really good too. So let's just look and see if there's... See this, I didn't thin this out as much. You can see it's nice and clear on the bottom. You can really see down in there. And which to me means good airflow from the bottom. I'm not going to worry so much about pathogens slushing up from the ground here and getting on my tomato plants. I do again here see a little blossom end rot on this guy. Oh, and another one here. So this happens when the plant is not getting enough calcium. I think maybe something else, but primarily calcium. And you can add calcium to your soil by adding some lime. And there's also some other ways to do it. But if you do your research, you're going to find out that adding calcium is almost more like a symptom treatment, right? So like if you're sick with, I don't know, the flu, and you take Tylenol or something, it kind of makes your symptoms go away, but it doesn't really cure what's happening. And the reason I make that analogy is because if there is a problem with your plant not getting enough calcium, chances are that it's not really because there's no calcium in the soil, because your soil would have to be pretty unhealthy not to have calcium in it. It happens, and we should amend our beds with calcium if it needs it. But more likely it's that your plant is not uptaking the calcium that's there. And I'll have to do some more research, but one of the things that could potentially cause that is just watering issues, so inconsistent watering, too much or too little water. This year we've had lots and lots and lots of rain. So I'd say these plants have been well watered consistently. They haven't dried out. They haven't had a chance to dry out because there's been so much rain. But I would also say that perhaps they've had too much rain. So any blossom end rot really, I would think is probably from that. Okay. There are 2 tomato plants in here that are not part of my sauce and salsa group, and they are my 2 competition tomatoes. And they're doing really well. I talked about them on my other video, so I won't go into detail on them here, but they're in here. They're doing awesome. I've never grown these beefsteak variety tomatoes before, and I'm having fun with them, so it'll be really exciting to see how those do. All right, so let's move over to this bed. So I'm going to move this. Alright, so this is just 2 rows of indeterminate tomatoes. All that means is that when we talk about determinate or indeterminate, these tomatoes, the Romas, the Viva Italia, they're determinate. They will grow to a determined size. They will stop growing, set all of their fruit, and then the plant will just die back. These two rows are indeterminate tomatoes, which means they don't have a set growth point. They're gonna grow until something kills them off. In Minnesota, that something is most likely gonna be cold, but it can also be disease. So these are tomatoes that, you know, they'll just go on and on if, you know, if the conditions are right, and they'll get really tall, they'll get really big. 10 feet tall, they can get huge. Sorry, bug flew in my mouth. It's so gross out here, you guys. All right, so two varieties in here. This one is Gladiator, and this one is Super Sauce. These Super Sauce tomatoes, both of them are paste or sauce tomato, but these Super Sauce tomatoes, the ad said one of these tomatoes is going to grow huge enough to fill a whole jar of sauce. I don't know if that's true, but we're going to find out. One thing to know though is that these are another variety that I started really, really late. Well, much later than my others. And when I got them in the ground, they were like this high, whereas my Romas and my other varieties were, you know, a good foot tall. I didn't even get to bury stems for these guys. They were just that big in their little cups. And so while the Romas and the Viva Italia I got to bury like 10 or 11 inches deep so they'd get good big root systems, these I did not. They just went in as deep as their roots because that's all the bigger they got before I got them in the garden. And I was concerned that I might be wasting some garden space on these because when I put the plants in, they were really unhealthy. They were tiny and they were stagnant. They just hadn't grown at all for a really long time. They spent some time in the greenhouse. They spent some time in the house. But they didn't grow. I mean, my other plants just kind of consistently grew and grew, but these guys stopped growing for a long time. And even after I got them in the ground, they didn't grow for a long time. And so I was sort of concerned, but also I know that it's hard to make a tomato not grow. They tend to just do really well. So I had faith, and sure enough, they're taking off. But you can see they're not near what my other tomatoes are, even though they should be bigger. They should be much bigger than my indeterminate tomatoes over here, or my determinate tomatoes on this side. But they're not. So I got them started late. I kept them in their cups for way too long. And then another kind of oopsie I did was I waited too long to support them and to prune them. So I did a Florida weave on these. I didn't have enough stakes or cages to do these. So I tried this Florida weave method where essentially you put a big, nice, tall, sturdy stake on each end of the tomato row and just weave a string through each tomato plant, back and forth between, and then also around the tomato. And that holds them in place, and it's working really well, and I kind of like it. So I'll probably do that again. But these were really big and bushy by the time I did that, and I really ended up pruning a lot off these plants. So two things. I was rough with them when I strung them up. You know, they were all kind of laying on the ground, and I had to bend them up, and the strings kind of, you know, added a little extra stress. I mean, you can see some of the damage down here from just the string hitting it. And then I did end up pruning off a lot, and I did it all at once. So I was sort of concerned that, you know, it would stress the plant, and I'm sure that it did. But I think they're going to bounce back. I think they're going to do fine. They're doing really well. One thing I noticed in here, so this one is the Gladiator on this side. This one, see, they're already getting some pretty big tomatoes coming here. Here's my hand for reference. Yeah, this is a pretty big tomato. But one thing I noticed that they're not consistent. So some of them kind of came in a little bit scraggly, and some of them came in really full and hearty. This one over here, so I could have pruned these back to just one main stem. Most of them I did 2. A couple of them I did 3. This one was just a beast. I cut a lot off this plant, and these 3, 1, 2 back here, and 3 stems were the biggest, but this plant is so much bigger. All 3 of these stems right here is off that one plant, and it's just so much bigger than the rest of the plants, and I don't know why. I don't recall it being special when I put it in the ground. It just, for whatever reason, the suckers came off that plant and they just went crazy, and they grew like crazy, and it's taller than the rest. I mean, that one's pretty tall on the end. The rest of these are kind of short. This one's tall. These are kind of short. So they're not growing real consistent, and I don't know if it's a newer variety that maybe hasn't stabilized a lot yet. But so far these fruits are looking really good. There's plenty of them. Lots of flowers coming in on this plant. I'm happy with it. We'll see how it goes. This last one on the end is really wimpy. It was, I don't know, really shaded by the other plants. But now that I've opened up some of that sunshine to them, maybe this one will start doing better. What is that? What is that? Is that alive? What is that? I don't know. Can you see that? I'm gonna pluck that off. I don't know, just looks like part of the plant to me, but it's probably nothing. I'm just gonna set that down. So these are doing well, considering everything. Let's go over here. These are the super sauce tomatoes. They don't seem quite as prolific as the others, but I do see some fruits coming on. Again, they're not super consistent. See, these are kind of rounder fruits. Some of them are a little bit more elongated. This one looks like it might have been a double blossom. There's a nice big one back here. But again, these are supposed to be those super sauce. They're supposed to be able to fill an entire canning jar with one tomato, but I don't know if that is it a pint jar, probably. This one's pretty big. It looks really nice. It looks, I don't know, it looks hearty. Maybe this one is one that I might like to eat sometime. So those are my sauce tomatoes. Some of them, like the Romas and the Viva Italia, they really got the white glove treatment kind of the whole time from seed to today. These, you know, these have really had to put some effort into, but I think they were a little bit neglected, and they're coming back. But that said, there's something else I want to show you. This is the location of last year's, This is the location of last year's compost pile. We had to move it to finish painting the house back here, and actually we just finished that. Craig did the other day, and scooped out what was left down here. And you know, Craig was taking care of that, and he came in the house and he said, "Did you plant tomatoes in that compost pile?" And I said, "Well, not intentionally." So I've got these volunteer tomato plants in here. where the compost pile was, and that's understandable. I mean, this is going to be really rich soil over here. It's getting a lot of sun in the afternoon and evening. This lettuce is growing in here too. I threw some lettuce down here. So yes, I had been throwing some of my old, not doing well plants down here. These are, I think these are the plants that I had given up on and threw in my compost. And they are gorgeous. They're going to stay here, and I want to see how they do. Let's take a look in one more spot. This is my new spot for compost. This rack will go back to where we just were. So we'll continue to have compost over there in that other spot, but these are new this year compost piles. And we've got tomatoes. Again, this is where I'm throwing my outcast, my no good, giving up on tomato plants, and they're growing. I just threw the last of my extra seedlings in here today. I just chucked them on top, just like that. You can see them in there. And they're growing. I don't even know what this is growing in here. It kind of looks like, I don't know. Kind of looks like potatoes. But they're growing in here. Those are the moments that make gardeners love what they do. To know that you can put all kinds of work into your garden. You can baby your plants. You can pour on pesticides. You can do the organic thing. You can put eggshells in your tomato holes. You can put banana peels. You can do superstitious things. You can talk to your plants. There's so much that you can do to help your garden. I don't want to say help your garden because that's completely defeating the point of what I'm trying to say. There's a lot you can do, but ultimately it's out of our hands. God's growing our gardens, and we can do our part and tend to it and do our best to make sure that everything goes well. But ultimately, God's in control. If He wants a tomato to grow in your compost pile, it's going to grow there. If He wants a tomato to not grow in your garden, it's not going to grow there. So for all your victories in the garden, yes, be proud of all the work that you did, and be proud of the research, and be proud of the decisions that you made, but also be grateful for this wonderful thing that our God has given us. And on the flip side of that, don't blame yourself if things don't go well. There's only so much we can do. If we continue to get the rainy weather that we've had all year here in Minnesota, and I think kind of everywhere, we might start losing some of our gardens to disease and just rot, and that'll be outside of our control. If my little raccoon friend goes in the garden and eats everything I have, that can happen. If this afternoon we've got a tornado warning for the rest of the day, you could lose everything. But there's so many things, like I said before, that happen in the garden that you can really apply to your life and to your psyche, to make you a better person and make you more whole. And the moments that your tomatoes that accidentally grew in the garbage, the moment you see that they produce just like the ones that you've been tending to, it's humbling, and it's faith restoring. I think about my kids, and the same way, you can put them in the best schools, you can spend time with them, you can make sure that they're in baseball and the karate and swimming, and you can do everything for them and they're going to be who they are. So many lessons to learn from the garden. That's it for today. I hope that everyone is having good fortune in their gardens as I am. Maybe you're having better fortune. Maybe my garden is a little bit behind. If it is, I'd like to know if your garden's doing a little bit better. Let me know, and let me know if there's something that I've said that maybe was a mistake that I should be doing differently, or if there's something maybe you want to know about what I've done. Happy to share with you any information. I keep it pretty simple. But that's it for today. Enjoy the rest of the summer, everybody, and we'll see you next time.